Could this new race format replace sprint races? So we have just had the 2022 Brazilian sprint race, and it is probably the best sprint race we've had so far over the past 2 years. Now, it had all that it needed to be a great race, with the likes of Kevin Magnussen starting on pole and George Russell getting his first win and fighting with Verstappen for that win. Now, we had everything lined up to be a brilliant sprint race, and it was a great race, but if this is the best we can expect from sprint races, I think there's something lacking with this format, and a lot of the drivers seem to sort of not be that keen on it still. So we know Max Verstappen has come out and said he's not really a fan. He said, "I feel like we don't really have a race on Saturday when the sprint race is. You get a few points, but also you know that you can't risk a lot because the sprint race obviously affects the starting grid for Sunday. So what could be changed to the sprint race format to sort of improve this, and what would drivers prefer?" We know that Lando's also not a massive fan, as he thinks the strategy in sprint races isn't great. He suggested using a hypersoft tyre to sort of allow more competition between drivers with strategy, as whether you go the soft or medium, it doesn't really tend to fall off that much during the sprint race. Now, Lando's also said that growing up, having always qualifying and then having a race, that's what he's known Formula 1 to be, and he really likes that format. I think having the sprint race in the middle completely throws it off, and it's like another event that sort of ties the two together, and there's a lot of risk going from qualifying to the race if you take damage. Now, I do like the sprint race format. I do like the fact that we see racing or sort of some on-track competitive action on 3 of the days across a race weekend rather than just the 2 on a typical format, and I don't think I'd actually want to see this removed. I do like having this, and especially F1, I don't think this is going to go anywhere. We know next year is going to be 6 sprint races, and the following season is probably going to be more like 12 until every race has a sprint, as they can maximise the amount of money they get from this a lot more by selling a lot more tickets for the Friday. But what I think sprint races lack is they are too similar to the normal race, and they hold too much detriment between qualifying and the Grand Prix. So where I think there could be improvement, I think the sprint race could be replaced with some sort of team relay. Now, F1 is sort of known as a team sport. You've got the engineers, the 2 drivers, the reserve driver, team principal, but in terms of racing, it's not really much of a team sport. So I'm going to go through how I think a team relay could be sort of used to replace the sprint weekend format, and why I think this is a better format for F1 going forward. So the current format for the normal sprint weekend is on Friday, you have a single practice session, and then you have qualifying straight after. Then on Saturday you have the second practice session, then you go into sprint qualifying, and on Sunday it stays the same and you have the Grand Prix. Now, where I would change this was I would get rid of qualifying on the Friday. I think qualifying, a lot of older sort of F1 fans really like this qualifying format, and moving it to the Friday means a lot of them can't actually watch this as they're working or they've just got other commitments. So I think keep qualifying on the Saturday, and I would move the team relay to the Friday. So what would happen is you would have all 20 drivers, and half of the drivers, so 1 driver from each team, would start the race. Now, the total race would be half of the typical race distance from the Grand Prix. You would have a 3-lap pit window in the middle of the race, which allowed drivers to sort of tag in each other, and you can only have 1 team or 1 driver from each team on track at a particular time. Each driver can only do 1 stint, so you can't just keep swapping in and out. So then how would the grid be determined? One option would be you would have the reverse grid from the current constructors' standings. As there's only 10 drivers on track, this would be it'd make it easier to overtake and gain positions, and it would give an advantage to the teams like Williams and Haas, who are fighting at the back and maybe don't have normally as good of a chance of getting points. Now, you don't have to reward the drivers as much as sprint racing or the Grand Prix. The points could be completely separate, could even be in a different like constructor standing, could be like the team relay, which has a different prize and development allocation. But I think this would be the better format to determine the grid for this relay. So obviously the FP1 session is before that. I think you take the times from both drivers in FP1. I think you take their best times, the best time or the best lap they set in that session, and then you take the worst time from these two, and that is the time the team has to set the grid for the relay, and obviously the fastest would go first. Now the reason I've done this is because, let's say for example you had Verstappen and Perez, you could have Verstappen set a really quick lap on the softs, Perez doing long hard runs, could even be like 5 seconds off that time, and the Red Bulls could start first. Now I think it'd be interesting to have both drivers need to set a quick lap time to make things more interesting. They might sort of scrap this and not bother setting a lap time to start further back to do long runs on the hard tyres, whereas you might get a team like Williams, both drivers go out on the softs, set a really quick lap time, and then they'll start the race first. Now another thing is this would add importance to another session. Currently you have the team relay, which is important because you would get points. You would have qualifying, which is important because it sets the grid for Sunday, and then you would have the Grand Prix. Now this would also add some sort of jeopardy into FP1 because you'd want to set a good time in order to get points from the team relay. So let's say you take the fastest lap time from the slowest of the two drivers, and that sets the grid. I think that's probably the best format. Say Perez, Hamilton, Lando and Leclerc are the drivers who set the slowest lap time in FP1 between the two out of their fastest. This is the way I would set up the grid. So how would the race actually work? So as I mentioned before, you'd have half race distance. I think anything less than this, having two drivers do it, so they're only doing a quarter of the race. Anything more I think is going to be too long, and anything less I think is going to be way too short. Having a driver do like a fifth race distance, I just don't think it's going to be enough. So say you choose to start with Leclerc, I don't think it matters who you use. I don't think you should have to use whoever set the fastest time. I think this could add a bit of strategy which could be useful. You start on Leclerc and you obviously have that 3-lap pit window in the middle of the race. Leclerc will start to slow down over time as his tyres degrade, sort of depending on what tyre he uses. He might use a soft or a medium, and then he would pit, and Carlos Sainz would come out when Leclerc pits, and then he would finish off this relay race, obviously on fresher tyres, and it'd be up to the team to decide when they pit the drivers, but obviously he would be much quicker, and then as the same, his tyres would start to fall off towards the end of the race. So I think this would work pretty well. You would have, like, say the Red Bull and Ferrari are out on track and it's coming up to the pit window and the 3-lap pit window opens, then you would have these drivers sort of staying out, and then you might have, say, the McLarens. They might not be doing that great with the current driver, so they might choose to pit right at the start and try overcut the other drivers. So then you would have the McLaren driver come in, and as soon as they hit the pit limiter marker, I think the other driver would always be ready, and they'll leave the garage. Now obviously there's going to be some sort of like logistics to this, because having 10 drivers pit in a 3-lap pit window might be a little bit tight, but they do on pit stops anyway. Like when it rains, they all come in at once. So I think if the other driver's in the garage ready to go, this should be fine, and it's going to add a bit of strategy when you pit the drivers on what lap. So a reason I like this format is because I really think it emphasises the team sport aspect of F1. Currently reserve drivers obviously have a role within the team, but it's really minor. They might get a couple FP1 sessions and do some simulation work across the season, but they're not really that much of a part of the team, and I think this could be an opportunity to have them as part of the team a lot more and be more front and centre, and it could be a good opportunity to get more F2 drivers into F1 teams, maybe even if they're not sort of the permanent drivers, but I think it'd be good to get more drivers into the F1 teams just to sort of give them more experience. So you could obviously, the teams only have 2 cars, so you can't add another car. I think that's going to be too much cost, money, logistics. But what you could do is say eventually you have 24 team relay races across the season, 1 for each race. You could have it so maybe in half the races, your reserve driver has to race in one of the cars. So I think this would work quite well. You'd have to sort of, Max Verstappen would have to give up maybe 6 races for a Red Bull Junior, and so would Perez. So I think this could add a lot more to the team aspect, but then this could negatively affect the points if you're giving up obviously valuable constructors points to a reserve driver. So talking of points, obviously there's only 10 finishing positions, and the current sprint race gives points to the top 8. Now the current allocation is 8 for first, and then it decreases by 1 all the way down to 1 for P8, and then you get no points for finishing in P9 or P10. Now obviously this probably wouldn't work, and instead of giving the drivers points, how I would change it was, I think for P1 you should get 20 points, P2 16, and then decreasing all the way down to P9 you get 2 points, and then if you're last you do not get any points. And these will be constructors points, so the 20 points will go towards the constructors championship between the drivers, and this won't be split for drivers. So say let's say the Mercedes finishes P1, Hamilton and Verstappen won't get any drivers championship points. This will be kept completely separate, but they will get 20 constructors championship points between them, and this will just get added to the constructors championship tally. Now teams across the bottom of the field like Williams and Haas, they might sort of aim for these points because they know the more points they get, the more money they're going to get at the end of the season, and they may know that say Magnussen's never going to compete for a championship, but this might give them something else to compete for. If they can get a few P1 or P2 finishes, this will give them a significant amount of points in the constructors. Obviously a lot more points will be awarded across that, so it'll be diluted a bit, but they've been getting a lot more points, and they have a sort of a much greater opportunity to sort of compete more like fairly, and sort of there's going to be a lot more points up for grabs, so they could finish a lot higher. So let me know what you think about this team relay feature. I really like it as a standalone event on the Friday. It won't have any impact on qualifying or the race, so it's completely standalone, but there is still some just sort of incentive to win it, as there will be constructors championship points available. So obviously this is just an initial thought, I haven't really thought this through too much, but let me know your thoughts down below in the comments if you think this is a good idea, or if you'd like to see something completely different replace the sprint weekends, or if you like them and you'd want them to stay. So thanks for watching to the end. If you could leave a comment or a like, it really helps the channel to grow, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.